The rain had stopped, but the clouds hadn't lifted from Ly Tieu Ca's heart. It had been 7 long weeks since she gave birth far too early, her body weak, her soul torn, and her baby taken away to the neonatal intensive care unit. Every night, she counted the seconds like prayers. Every morning, she woke up hoping for a sign. A single cry, a tiny movement, a word from the doctors that her son, her tiny, fragile, 7-month-old miracle, was strong enough to live. But day after day, the silence grew heavier. Until one morning, it broke. The call that changed everything. Hung burst through the front door, soaked in sunlight and breathless joy. His usually composed face so calm, so steady, was lit with something else, pure, uncontrolled happiness. "Tien Cook," he called, louder than usual, voice echoing through the wooden house. "Where are you?" Startled, she stepped out from the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour. Her heart skipped. "Hung, what happened?" He ran to her, gently grabbing her hands, eyes shining. "He's okay," he said. "Our son. He's okay." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "The doctor just called," Hung continued, his voice trembling. "They ran the final tests this morning. He's breathing on his own. No more tubes. No more machines. He's stable, strong, he's ready to come home." A moment to breathe again. Ly Tieu Ca dropped to her knees. Tears rushed down her cheeks faster than words. For weeks, she had carried a fear so large it consumed her. The fear that she would bury a child before ever hearing his cry. The fear that God had given her a gift only to take it back. But now, he was alive, he was strong. Hung knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms. "You did it," he whispered. "You gave him life. You gave him strength." "No," she sobbed. "We did." Their embrace was not just relief. It was a release of everything they had carried together, the sleepless nights, the silent prayers, the haunting worry that had never left them. All of it poured out now, washing away in tears of joy. The ride to the hospital. They arrived hand in hand, walking faster than they could think. Nurses smiled as they passed. Doctors nodded. Everyone who had seen the little boy struggle, who had watched his chest fight for air, now stood back and witnessed a miracle. And there he was, so small, wrapped in soft blue blankets, eyes closed, but peaceful, breathing, living. Ly Tieu Ca approached slowly, afraid to break the moment. Hung guided her forward, gently placing her hands beneath the baby's head. "Hold him," he said. Her fingers trembled as she lifted her son into her arms for the first time. It was like holding the sun. A new beginning. Later that evening, back at their home in the mountains, the family of 4 sat quietly around the fireplace. Han curled up with a book, the baby sleeping in a cradle, and Ly Tieu Ca resting her head on Hung's shoulder. She whispered, "I thought I was going to lose everything." Hung kissed her hair softly. "You didn't. You're here. He's here, and we're stronger now because of it." There were no grand speeches that night, no toasts or music, just the gentle crackle of fire and the sound of tiny breaths filling a house that had waited too long for them. Because sometimes, the greatest news doesn't come with noise. It arrives quietly, in the form of a heartbeat that once seemed too small to survive, and yet now echoes louder than any fear ever could. Title: A Baby Comes Home. The sky that morning was impossibly blue. A gentle wind swept across the valley, carrying the scent of wildflowers and distant rain. The villagers, who had watched from afar as Ly Tieu Ca struggled through fear and sorrow, now lined the quiet path leading to the wooden house. They came, not for ceremony, but for love. They came, because they had prayed to. The journey back. Hung stepped out of the car first, then walked carefully around to open the door for Ly Tieu Ca. In her arms was their son, wrapped in a soft cotton blanket. His tiny fingers curled, his breath steady. He had never seen the sky before, never felt the breeze, never heard the laughter waiting outside the hospital walls. Today, everything was new for him, and for them. As Ly Tieu Ca stepped forward, the villagers clapped softly. No one shouted. No one cheered. It was a moment too sacred for noise. An old woman bowed her head. A group of children stood with flowers. One man removed his hat and held it to his chest. "Welcome home, little one," someone whispered. A house that feels like home. The wooden house had been prepared days in advance. Hung had overseen every detail: warm blankets, filtered sunlight, and the cradle placed beside their bed, not in a nursery far away. He believed their son had spent enough nights alone. Inside, everything was soft and slow. Ly Tieu Ca laid the baby down gently and sat beside him, never taking her eyes off his face. Her fingers traced the curve of his cheek, her heart thudding with something she had nearly forgotten how to feel: peace. Hung stood by the doorway, watching quietly. He had seen her cry, scream, collapse, and fight. But he had never seen her like this, still and overflowing at the same time. She looked up at him and smiled. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "Neither am I," he replied. Hung chuckled, but his eyes shimmered. "That's a big promise," he said. "I'm a big girl," Han declared. They all laughed quietly, the room filled with warmth. A letter Hung never sent. That night, while the others slept, Hung sat at the table under a soft light and pulled out an old piece of stationery. He had started writing this letter weeks ago, on the night he thought they might lose the baby. But now, with joy instead of grief, he wrote again. "To my son, you were born too soon, but you are not too small. You fought to breathe when the world gave you no chance. And now, here you are sleeping, dreaming, loved beyond words. I promise to walk beside you, even when you fall. I promise to guide you, even when you don't know you're lost. You don't have to be strong, alone. That's what family is for. Welcome home, my boy, Dad." He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer to read to his son one day when he could understand not just the words, but the journey it took to get there. A new chapter begins. The next morning, the house awoke to birdsong and soft cries. The baby stirred in his cradle. Ly Tieu Ca rose slowly, her body still healing, but her spirit light. Life lesson: the quiet miracles that make us whole. In life, we often expect miracles to arrive with loud voices and dramatic signs. But sometimes, the most powerful miracles come quietly wrapped in a soft blanket, with tiny fingers and eyes barely open to the world. Ly Tieu Ca's journey reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's a mother waking up every day with tears in her eyes but hope in her heart. It's a father holding his breath beside a hospital bed, praying silently, refusing to give up. And it's a fragile newborn, born too soon, who chooses to fight for every single breath. This story teaches us that love is not found in grand gestures, but in the moments in between, in midnight feedings, in warm embraces, in soft lullabies sung through exhaustion. True strength is choosing to stay. True hope is refusing to let go, even when the odds are against you. We live in a world that often celebrates speed, success, and perfection. But Ly Tieu Ca's family shows us something different. They teach us that healing is slow, that peace is a process, and that the smallest lives can carry the greatest meaning. Miracles aren't always loud. Sometimes, they're quiet, steady, and sleeping in a crib next to your bed. As Ly Tieu Ca held her son for the first time, she realized something that many of us forget in the rush of daily life. Being present is more powerful than being perfect. She didn't have all the answers. She wasn't the strongest, the richest, or the most prepared. But she was there. Through every ultrasound, every restless night, every fearful heartbeat, she stayed. And that presence became the foundation of her child's survival. In the same way, Hung didn't arrive with dramatic promises or easy solutions. What he brought was steadiness, loyalty, and the simple but life-changing act of standing beside someone, refusing to let them face the storm alone. This teaches us a timeless truth. We don't need to be heroes to change someone's life, we just need to show up, fully, when it matters most. So many people carry silent struggles. A newborn in the hospital, a broken dream, a fear they cannot name. And often, the greatest gift we can give isn't advice, or money, or control. Its presence. A warm hand, a listening heart. The willingness to walk beside someone when their world is falling apart. In Ly Tieu Ca's story, healing didn't come through a miracle alone. It came through love, consistency, and the belief that even the most fragile life deserves to be fought for. And perhaps that's the final lesson. In a world that celebrates strength, never forget the beauty of softness. In a life filled with uncertainty, never underestimate the power of staying. And in moments of fear, remember that love, quiet, steady, unconditional, can light the way home.